Welcome, everybody, to a very special Kicking Tables episode. We are so delighted to welcome Rob Daviau, the creator of the Legacy games himself. Welcome, Rob, to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You are literally the father of Legacy games. It's so exciting
I
to have you here.
am. It's been about 10 years. It's been a
Yes.
little over 10 years since I thought of the idea and almost 10 years since the first one came out.
Yeah. Risk
I had no
Legacy
idea it was going to
was your first
be
one?
this. Yeah, that was in fall, like October, September of 2011.
2011. That's right. I remember that. A friend of mine bought me that game. I loved the idea. I was never a huge Risk fan, but the Legacy idea was so mind blowing. Can you tell us, uh, like what drove the creation of Legacy? How did you come up with this idea to create this new style of gaming?
Yeah, at the very top level is I was in a brainstorm for Clue, and we were trying to think of new things to do for Clue.
One of my
And there were two
favorite
things.
games.
Yeah, I,
Yeah.
I love Clue. And there were two things that sort of came together that day. Is I made a joke earlier in the day, said I don't know why they keep inviting these people up for dinner because someone always gets murdered, implying that there was a larger sense of narrative and not this Groundhog Day of doing it,
Right.
again and again. And then later that afternoon, I was talking about assumptions for board games, like challenging assumptions, like you could say the board starts on the table or the board starts open or starts face up. You just sort of say things that seem obvious. Most of the time it leads nowhere, but I said the game doesn't remember what you did last game. And my boss kind of looked at me and he was marking it down and he pointed like the marker at me that I was using to write on the whiteboard. And I'm like, yeah, no, there's something there. And I started thinking about role playing and serial storytelling. And
Hmm.
it took about a year and a half to go from a Clue idea to a Risk idea to actually, making and figuring it all out.
Have you ever gone back to wonder what a Clue Legacy would be?
I know. I remember the pitch.
Yeah,
Uh,
yes.
yeah, but I don't work for Hasbro anymore, so I'm
No,
not going to give
that's
it
no,
away
that's
for free.
fair. But now you
Yeah.
got my mind going. It's like, man, a Clue Legacy. That would be so cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much what you'd expect, right? I think I called it Clue the Usual Suspects.
Oh, nice.
Right?
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I mean, since we played legacy games, every time we sit down to play a non-legacy game, we're going like, wouldn't this make a great legacy edition if we could just get that in
Yeah.
there? If you had the ability to your dream game to make a legacy game, do you have any thoughts of like what the perfect game you think would be a legacy?
Not one game in particular. I mean, I know the style of games that
Yeah,
it's worked well on, which is a game that's relatively light at the beginning. Like Pandemic is a good
Mm.
light to medium weight game for gamers because you have to have room to expand the rules from there, right? Every time you
yeah,
open something, you're adding a rule, you're adding a complexity. If the game starts too loaded at the beginning, it's too hard to learn in the first game and then just gets even more so. And it needs to have a world or characters that makes you want to be there for 8 to 14 games.
Right.
Right? If it's a
yeah,
very abstract game or a very light theme, which makes a perfectly good game where you're like, well, the theme's not that heavy. It's largely just, a math engine. That's not going to keep people's attention
yeah.
to come back again and again.
Yeah.
That's my definition. Other people may have their own.
Well, do you have a dream title in your mind that you'd love to create a legacy
I,
game for, or no?
I really don't.
No.
I really
Okay.
don't. And I'm not just saying that, it's like sometimes people will say, how about this? And I'll go, yeah, that would be fun. Or how about this?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that would be fun. Right. Like I just, sort of, I don't want to say lucked into, but became very fortunate that Pandemic was one of the second one
Hmm.
that
Oh,
I did
yes.
and worked so well.
Yeah. Well,
But
it's great that you brought Pandemic. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Pandemic. I have an entire shelf dedicated to every single Pandemic game that's ever been made. Like, I seriously love it. And when you announced Pandemic Legacy, it blew my mind. I couldn't wait for when season one came out. So, like, and season zero is coming out very, very soon. What can we expect from Pandemic Legacy Zero or Legacy Season Zero?
Season Zero, well, it's the third game in the trilogy, but it's a prequel. It takes place in 1962, and it's sort of an origin story of a sort. Um, it has a Cold War spy thriller theme at the beginning. I mean, basically, you play people who are right out of medical school who got recruited by the CIA,
Okay.
become agents because of your medical knowledge, because there's word of it that the Soviet Union is trying to engineer some sort of bioweapon, and you have to track it down. So the game starts with no diseases,
Right.
Okay.
and
Right.
then from there, the story sort of goes, and you play secret agents, and it has a lot of early '60s movie tropes. Right? We discover when we do a deeper dive into the period um, or the story, people get a little lost because it might be 2 months between chapters that you play.
Right.
So we,
Okay.
we kept it a little light. It's not quite James Bond. It's more 3 Days of the Condor or something like that.
Nice. Very cool.
So the having played season 1 or 2 is not necessary in order to play season 0. Is that correct?
It's not necessary. No, I mean you could play 0 first, and then if you like it, go 1 and then 2. I just wouldn't recommend playing 2 first because sort of takes last place chronologically and probably is the toughest one mechanisms wise to sort of play. Um, Season 1 starts out pretty much like Pandemic, so if you play
Yes.
Pandemic,
Yeah.
get it, and Season 0 doesn't start as Pandemic. It's got a slightly, a different twist on the core engine, but it's fairly straightforward. Whereas Season 2, we really turn things on their head. Like most of the board is gone and cubes are good, and
Yep.
Yeah.
and that one sort of not requires, but I would encourage you to have played one of the other
I
two.
played
before you
one
do that
first. Yeah.
And narratively,
So is
it doesn't make sense to start there.
Yeah, so narratively, is it 0, 1, 2 would be the order that you'd recommend if somebody's not played any of them? Would you go 0, 1, 2 or 1, 2, 0?
I would go 1, 2, 0 because that's
Yeah.
just the way we told the story. I think if you
Okay.
are saying right now, like, oh, but I really like spies, I think 0, 1, 2 would work perfectly fine.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the Star Wars thing. You can choose whatever order you want.
Yeah, you can choose whatever order you want to watch them. Yeah.
That's right. Now, season 0, from the description, it doesn't deal, as you mentioned, it doesn't deal with disease cubes. There's no diseases. It's using Soviet spies instead. Actually, very much like the Reign of Cthulhu style of Pandemic, which uses its cultists instead of diseases. What other changes in season 0 have you incorporated while still keeping that pandemic feel?
Right. Well, since there are no diseases, usually in Pandemic, you're looking to get, a meld of cards of the same to find a cure, but there's no cure. There's no disease to cure at the beginning. So what do we do? These sort of like collect all the cards and put them together. And in this, it's basically building a team. You're a lone operative. You're good at stealth. You're good at sort of getting the lay of the land and handling things a little bit, but you're not in a position to really complete an objective. You need a team. So when you put the cards together, you create a team, which is represented by a little unmarked van that goes on the board, and then any player can control this team. It's like an NPC shared by all players, and you can use them to help sort of remove agents from the board a little faster. And you almost always need a team to complete the objective.
Wow.
At the beginning of the game, you'll have you start with two objectives, and it'll say like have a team in this city, and the teams are coded. One thing that is different about this game as well is there are sort of NATO allied Western cities, there are Soviet cities, and then there are neutral or unaffiliated cities, and your teams can only work in the city that matches their cover. So you create an allied team, and they basically have an allied cover, and they can work and they can do things in London, but they're not going to work in Moscow. Their cover would be blown. They would be spotted. If you create a Soviet-themed team, it means they have Soviet aliases and can move freely and do what they need to do in Soviet cities.
Right. Will we see the narrative move directly into season 1? Like, without giving spoilers, is there a natural progression from 0 into 1? If those who've played
Plus
1,
these three
like,
games.
yeah, like, is there going to be a
Yeah, I'm not
natural
going to really get into it other than it's the third part of a trilogy, and it does take place in the same world, and it does hopefully tell a coherent story.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I love Pandemic. I will definitely be playing it. That's for sure. That sounds amazing. But you've still kept that core feeling. It still feels like you're playing Pandemic, even though no diseases and
Yeah, it really does. What we tried to do with all these games is make you feel like you're playing a Pandemic game, just not core Pandemic again and again and again, because we're asking people to play at least 12, often like 15 games of this. And if we just kept the same core system, we're asking you to play 45 games that kind of like use the exact same system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we thought it would be more interesting to break it into thirds. Just like 2 was different from 1, this is, 0 is different from both of them as well. It's not unlike, the Cthulhu game or the Fall of Rome or some other stuff that,
Yeah.
Matt's worked on, which just adds different twists, like the one in Amsterdam where there's floods and,
Iberia.
disease spreads.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Iberia with the, he's always looking for how does he take his core engine and then just work a little twist on it. So you're like, oh, this feels comfortable but fresh. And we did the same thing here.
Was Matt Leacock involved in season 0 as well?
Oh yeah, we're co-designers.
Yeah, okay.
We meet and we design everything together. About the only thing we do separately is I tend to write the rule book and lay it out.
Okay.
And he tends to manage what we call the kit, which is a giant Adobe Illustrator file with all the cards and the
Right.
boxes and the stickers. So we kind of each have our files that we take care of, but we would meet 1 to 3 times a week, talk for 2 hours, block out card by card, line by line,
Nice.
all the rules, how it all works. There's Google Sheets and a journal and everything.
Well, that's the beauty of Pandemic, right? There's so many versions of Pandemic, and they, while still feeling like Pandemic, they all are different games, and that's really the beauty of the whole Pandemic series. Is you can play these games, you still feel like you're playing it, but it's a totally different game, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, Matt created a great system.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I got to kind of play around in it with him for 3 games. I mean, there's probably 12 or 15 Pandemic games now. So
Yes, and I have all of them.
What is it like marketing and shipping a game like this during an actual pandemic? Like, have you had any opportunity to sort of like deal with that sort of scenario?
yeah, I mean, that's just surreal. But we finished the game last April or June of 2019, and it was all done and translated, and art was done by like November of last year. So it did cause some delays, and I think there was at the beginning some like, hold on, how are people going to react to the game Pandemic during a pandemic? It turns out that sales have gone up, not down.
Yeah.
People are sort of enjoying it. In this case, it's 1962. It starts out with no diseases on the board. If it was season 1, I'd be a little more like, oh, this is weird. Something that starts in January and kind of, goes through. And in this case, it appears that, people aren't troubled by it. And in fact, the theme is sort of adjacent.
People have a dark sense of humor when it comes to this sort of thing. So I think they flock to this sometimes.
I said either sales are going to plummet or they're going to, go way up, and they went up.
Yeah.
Also, being home.
Yes,
that's true.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're lucky enough to have a built-in gaming group, in your home, people certainly took advantage of that.
Yeah.
For sure.
So can you tease anything that you're working on next? What's your next project in the works?
Well, I split my time between doing my own games, many of which, but not all of which, are legacy games, and being sort of the co-owner and creative director at Restoration Games. And I see some games behind you, our Unmatched series. Thank you very much.
Yeah, huge fan.
Thank you.
They're so good.
I am spending right now about 80% of my time on Restoration. I'm 50 years old. It's a new challenge because we're thinking about marketing and positioning and production and art, and I have people working for me, and it's kind of like just a fun new horizon to play around with as a publisher. And then I have one game that's with a publisher that'll be out in 2022, and I'm finishing up another one for 2022. There'll be almost nothing next year. Almost everyone's games, at least mine, just got pushed out a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because of the pandemic. So I continue to do about 1 to 3 of my own games on the side during the year, and then manage the Restoration line, where we put out 3 to 7 games a year, including Unmatched and expansions and things like that.
Right.
So we have more Unmatched stuff in the works. Right now, we're finishing up Return to Dark Tower. That was our big Kickstarter in the spring. The print handover for the main game is happening like in the other room, going over some like last minute files and checking everything. And we're already sort of ramping up for 21 and 22. And what's going on there.
So we
I've
can
got
expect some more legacy games from you as well in the future?
yeah, at least one. There's one that I'm done with, and one I'm almost done with, but there's that's on pause. We'll see if it comes
Okay.
together.
Okay.
No matter how successful you are in this industry, there's games that you get almost to the end or nearly to the end, and then something changes. People are like, I don't want this.
Oh, okay.
I'm in an unusual position, and it's just part of it, where a company might come to me and say, "Will you do a legacy version of our game?" And then when I get to the end, if it doesn't get published, I can't take it somewhere else. Right? A lot of
Right.
times, a designer makes something and they shop it around, and it's theirs, and so I have to work that into my contract. Like, okay, but if you don't make it, I still get something.
Yeah.
And it's not it's not anything you want to have happen, and
Yeah.
that game may or may not continue. So two more legacy, and I'm finishing up a non-legacy and about to start another legacy and a non-one.
Wow.
And I have an idea for a new game. Yeah, my
Yeah.
problem isn't that I lack for ideas or opportunities right now. It's saying no to some of them that I really want to do, just so the ones that I get onto my docket are good.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm doing too many things and get stretched too thin, the quality will go down. So sometimes I'm saying no to things that I just really want to do, but can't find the time.
That's awesome. Well, you're living a dream, creating games for a living and having too many games to create. So that's
Having too many games. Yeah.
that's not a bad place to be from our perspective, anyway.
Yeah, I work a lot, but I like my job.
Yeah.
And I just actually tweeted this whole week. I sort of live tweeted out my schedule of what goes on. It was a design light sort of week, but it just shows people that there's proofreading and production, and there's just a lot of meetings and things that go into it that you might not expect if you're just thinking like I sit down with a piece of paper and just sort of drawing out cards and doing so. I think some designers have that. That's just not the way that my job is structured.
Yeah, that's fair. So Pandemic Legacy Season 0, the final in the trilogy, October 23rd, is that the launch date?
October 23rd, so it was 3 weeks from yesterday from when we're recording. It's a Friday. That should be a worldwide launch.
Awesome. Well,
there may be some delays.
It will be in my hands on that day. I can guarantee it.
Thank
Rob,
you very
it
much.
has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. As a fan of your games, and legacy games are not the only ones. Cthulhu May Die is in my library. Like, there's numerous games in my library that have your name on it. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. We really appreciate you taking the time with us today.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
I'm Rob Daviau. Thanks for watching my interview today. Hope you pick up Pandemic Legacy Season 0 and the Unmatched line from Restoration. Thanks.